How the first letter was written. Once upon a most early time was a Neolithic man. He was not a Jute or an Angle or even a Dravidian, which he might well have been, best beloved, but never mind why. He was a primitive, and he lived cavally in a cave. He lived cavily in a cave, and he wore very few clothes, and he couldn't read, and he couldn't write, and he didn't want to. And except when he was hungry, he was quite happy. His name was Gumai Bapsulai, and that means man who does not put his foot forward in a hurry. But we, O best beloved, will call him Tugumai for short. And his wife's name was Shumai Tiwindro, and that means lady who asks a very many questions. But we, O best beloved, will call her Toshumai for short. And his little girl daughter's name was Tefimai Metalumai, and that means small person without any manners who ought to be spanked. But I'm going to call her Taffy. And she was Tugumai Bopsulai's best beloved, and her own mummy's best beloved, and she was not spanked half as much as was good for her, and they were all three very happy. As soon as Taffy could run about, she went everywhere with her daddy Tagumai, and sometimes they would not come home to the cave till they were hungry, and then Shumai, the windrow, would say, "Where in the world have you two been to get so shocking dirty? Really, my Tugumai, you'll know better than my Taffy." Now attend and listen. One day, Tugumai Bapsulai went down through the beaver swamp to the Wagai River to spear carpfish for dinner, and Taffy went too. Tugumai's spear was made of wood with shark's teeth at the end, and before he had caught any fish at all, he accidentally broke it clean across by jabbing it down too hard on the bottom of the river. They were miles and miles from home. Of course, they had their lunch with them in a little bag, and Tugumai had forgotten to bring any extra spears. "Here's a pretty kettle of fish," said Tugumai. "It will take me half the day to mend this." "There's your big black spear at home," said Taffy. "Let me run back to the cave and ask Mummy to give it to me." "It's too far for your little fat legs," said Tugumai. "Besides, you might fall into the beaver swamp and be drowned. We must make the best of a bad job." He sat down and took out a little leather mindy bag full of reindeer sinews and strips of leather and lumps of beeswax and resin, and began to mend the spear. Taffy sat down too, with her toes in the water and her chin in her hand, and thought very hard. Then she said, "I say, Daddy, it's an awful nuisance that you and I don't know how to write, isn't it? If we did, we could send a message for the new spear." "Taffy," said Tagumai, "how often have I told you not to use slang? Awful isn't a pretty word, but it would be a convenience, now you mention it, if we could write home." Just then a stranger man came along the river, but he belonged to a far tribe, the Tuaras, and he did not understand one word of Tugumai's language. He stood on the bank and smiled at Taffy because he had a little girl daughter of his own at home. Tugumai drew a hank of deer sinews from his mindy bag and began to mend his spear. "Come here," said Taffy. "Do you know where my mummy lives?" And the stranger man said, being, as you know, a Tuara. "Silly," said Taffy, and she stamped her foot because she saw a shoal of very big carp going up the river just when her daddy couldn't use his spear. "Don't bother grown-ups," said Tagumai, so busy with his spear mending that he did not turn round. "I aren't," said Taffy. "I only want him to do what I want him to do, and he won't understand." "Then don't bother me," said Tagumai. And he went on pulling and straining at the deer sinews with his mouth full of loose ends. The stranger man, a genuine Tawara he was, sat down on the grass, and Taffy showed him what her daddy was doing. The stranger man thought, "This is a very wonderful child. She stamps her foot at me, and she makes faces. She must be the daughter of that noble chief who is so great that he won't take any notice of me." So he smiled more politely than ever. "Now," said Taffy, "I want you to go to my mummy because your legs are longer than mine, and you won't fall into the beaver swamp, and ask for Daddy's other spear, the one with the black handle that hangs over our fireplace." The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, thought, "This is a very, very wonderful child. She waves her arms and she shouts at me, but I don't understand a word of what she says. But if I don't do what she wants, I greatly fear that that haughty chief, man who turns his back on callers, will be angry." He got up and twisted a big flat piece of bark off a birch tree and gave it to Taffy. He did this, best beloved, to show that his heart was as white as the birch bark, and that he meant no harm. But Taffy didn't quite understand. "Oh," said she, "now I see. You want my mummy's living address. Of course, I can't write, but I can draw pictures if I've anything sharp to scratch with. Please lend me the shark's tooth off your necklace." The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, didn't say anything. So Taffy put up her little hand and pulled at the beautiful bead and seed and shark tooth necklace round his neck. The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, thought, "This is a very, very, very wonderful child. The shark's tooth on my necklace is a magic shark's tooth, and I was always told that if anybody touched it without my leave, they would immediately swell up or burst. But this child doesn't swell up or burst, and that important chief, man who attends strictly to his business, who has not yet taken any notice of me at all, doesn't seem to be afraid that she will swell up or burst. I had better be more polite." So he gave Taffy the shark's tooth, and she lay down flat on her tummy with her legs in the air, like some people on the drawing room floor when they want to draw pictures. And she said, "Now I'll draw you some beautiful pictures. You can look over my shoulder, but you mustn't joggle. First, I'll draw Daddy fishing. It isn't very like him, but Mummy will know because I've drawn his spear all broken. Well, now I'll draw the other spear that he wants, the black-handled spear. It looks as if it was sticking in Daddy's back, but that's because the shark tooth slipped, and this piece of bark isn't big enough. That's the spear I want you to fetch. So I'll draw a picture of me myself explaining to you. My hair doesn't stand up like I've drawn, but it's easier to draw that way. Now I'll draw you. I think you're very nice, really, but I can't make you pretty in the picture, so you mustn't be offended. Are you offended?" The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, smiled. He thought, "There must be a big battle going to be fought somewhere, and this extraordinary child, who takes my magic shark's tooth, but who does not swell up or burst, is telling me to call all the great chief's tribe to help him. He is a great chief, or he would have noticed me." "Look," said Taffy, drawing very hard and rather scratchily. "Now I've drawn you, and I've put the spear that Daddy wants into your hand just to remind you that you're to bring it. Now, I'll show you how to find my mummy's living address. You go along till you come to two trees, those are trees, and then you go over a hill, that's a hill, and then you come into a beaver swamp all full of beavers. I haven't put in all the beavers because I can't draw beavers. I've drawn their heads, and that's all you'll see of them when you cross the swamp. Mind you don't fall in. Then our cave is just beyond the beaver swamp. It isn't as high as the hills really, but I can't draw things very small. That's my mummy outside. She's beautiful. She's the most beautifulest mummy there ever was, but she won't be offended when she sees I've drawn her so plain. She'll be pleased of me because I can draw. Now, in case you forget, I've drawn the spear that Daddy wants outside our cave. It's inside, really. But you show the picture to my mummy, and she'll give it to you. I've made her holding up her hands because I know she'll be so pleased to see you. Isn't it a beautiful picture? And do you quite understand, or shall I explain again? The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, looked at the picture and nodded very hard. He said to himself, if I do not fetch this great chief's tribe to help him, he will be slain by his enemies, who are coming up on all sides with spears. Now I see why the great chief pretended not to notice me. He feared that his enemies were hiding in the bushes, would see him deliver a message to me. Therefore he turned his back and let the wise and wonderful child draw the terrible picture showing me his difficulties. I will away and get help for him from his tribe. He did not even ask Taffy the road, but raced off into the bushes like the wind, with the birch bark in his hand, and Taffy sat down most pleased. Now, this is the picture that Taffy had drawn for him. What have you been doing, Taffy? Said Tugumai. He had mended his spear and was carefully waving it to and fro. It's a little derangement of my own, Daddy dear, said Taffy. If you won't ask me questions, you'll know all about it in a little time, and you'll be surprised. You don't know how surprised you'll be, Daddy. Promise me you'll be surprised. Very well, said Tugumai, and went on fishing. The stranger man, did you know he was a Tawara? Hurried away with the picture and ran for some miles, till quite by accident he found Teshumai Tewindro at the door of her cave, talking to some other Neolithic ladies who had come into a primitive lunch. Taffy was very like Teshumai, especially about the upper part of the face and the eyes. The stranger man, always a pure Tawara, smiled politely and handed Teshumai the birch bark. He had run hard, so that he panted, and his legs were scratched with brambles, but he still tried to be polite. As soon as Teshumai saw the picture, she screamed like anything and flew at the stranger man. The other Neolithic ladies at once knocked him down and sat on him in a long line of six, while Teshumai pulled his hair. It's as plain as the nose on this stranger man's face, she said. He has stuck my Tugumai all full of spears and frightened poor Taffy so that her hair stands all on end. And not content with that, he brings me a horrible picture of how it was done. Look! He showed the picture to all the Neolithic ladies sitting patiently on the stranger man. Here is my Tugumai with his broken arm. Here is a spear sticking into his back. Here is a man with a spear ready to throw. Here is another man throwing a spear from a cave. And here are a whole pack of people. They were Taffy's beavers, really, but they did look rather like people. Coming up behind Tugumai. Isn't it shocking? Most shocking, said the Neolithic ladies, and they filled the stranger man's hair with mud, at which he was surprised, and they beat upon the reverberating tribal drums and called together all the chiefs of the tribe of Tugumai, with their hetmans and dolmens, all naguses, woons, and akhuns of the organization, in addition to the warlocks, angakocks, jujumen, bonzes, and the rest, who decided before they chopped the stranger man's head off, he should instantly lead them down to the river and show them where he had hidden poor Taffy. By this time, the stranger man, in spite of being a Tawara, was really annoyed. They had filled his hair quite solid with mud. They had rolled him up and down on knobby pebbles. They had sat upon him in a long line of six. They had thumped him and pumped him till he could hardly breathe, and though he did not understand their language, he He was almost sure that the names the Neolithic ladies called him were not ladylike. However, he said nothing till all the tribe of Tugumai were assembled. Then he led them back to the bank of the Wagai River, and there they found Taffy making daisy chains, and Tugumai carefully spearing small carp with his mended spear. "Well, you have been quick," said Taffy. "Why did you bring so many people?" "Daddy dear, this is my surprise. Are you surprised, Daddy?"
"Very," said Tugumai, "but it has ruined all my fishing for the day. Why, the whole dear, kind, nice, clean, quiet tribe is here, Taffy."
And so they were. First of all walked Shumai to Windrow and the Neolithic ladies, tightly holding on to the stranger man, whose air was full of mud, although he was a Tawara. Behind them came the head chief, the vice chief, deputy, and assistant chiefs, all armed to the upper teeth. The hetmans and heads of hundreds, Platoffs with their platoons, and dolmens with their detachments, woons, negusses, akhuns ranking in the rear, still armed to the teeth. Behind them was the tribe in hierarchical order, from owners of 4 caves, one for each season, a private reindeer run, and 2 salmon leaps, to feudal and prognathous villains, semi-entitled to half a bearskin of winter nights 7 yards from the fire, and adscript serfs holding the reversion of a scraped marrow bone under Harriet. Aren't those beautiful words, best beloved? They were all there, prancing and shouting, and they frightened every fish for 20 miles, and Tugumai thanked them in a fluid Neolithic oration. Then Shumai to Windrow ran down and kissed and hugged Taffy very much indeed, but the head chief of the tribe of Tugumai took Tugumai by the top knot feathers and shook him severely.
"Explain, explain, explain!"
cried all the tribe of Tugumai.
"Goodness sakes alive!" said Tugumai. "Let go of my top knot. Can't a man break his carp spear without the whole countryside descending on him? You are a very interfering people."
"I don't believe you brought my daddy's black-handled spear after all," said Taffy. "And what are you doing to my nice stranger man?" They were thumping him by 2s and 3s and 10s till his eyes turned round and round. He could only gasp and point at Taffy. "Where are the bad people who speared you, my darling?" said Shumai to Windrow.
"There weren't any," said Tugumai. "My only visitor this morning was a poor fellow that you are trying to choke. Aren't you well, or are you ill, tribe of Tugumai?" "He came with a horrible picture," said the head chief. "A picture that showed you were full of spears."
Er, perhaps I'd better explain that I gave him that picture," said Taffy, but she did not feel quite comfy.
"You?"
Said the tribe of Tugumai altogether. "Small person with no manners who ought to be spanked? You?"
"Taffy dear, I'm afraid we're in for a little trouble,"
said her daddy, and put his arm round her, so she didn't care.
"Explain, explain, explain!"
said the head chief of the tribe of Tugumai, and he hopped on one foot. "I wanted the stranger man to fetch daddy's spear, so I drawed it," said Taffy. "There wasn't lots of spears. There was only one spear. I drawed it 3 times to make sure. I couldn't help it looking as if it stuck into daddy's head. There wasn't room on the birch bark. And those things that Mummy called bad people are my beavers. I drawed them to show him the way through the swamp, and I drawed Mummy at the mouth of the cave looking pleased because he is a nice stranger man, and I think you are just the stupidest people in the world," said Taffy. "He is a very nice man. Why have you filled his hair with mud? Wash him." Nobody said anything at all for a long time, till the head chief laughed. Then the stranger man, who was at least a Tawara, laughed. Then Tagumai laughed till he fell down flat on the bank. Then all the tribe laughed more and worse and louder. The only people who did not laugh were Shumai, Windrow, and all the Neolithic ladies. They were very polite to all their husbands and said idiot ever so often. Then the head chief of the tribe of Tagumai cried and said and sang,
"O small person without any manners who ought to be spanked, you've hit upon a great invention."
I didn't intend to. I only wanted Daddy's black-handled spear, said Taffy.
Never mind. It is a great invention, and someday men will call it writing. At present it is only pictures, and as we have seen today, pictures are not always properly understood. But the time will come, O babe of Tugumai, when we shall make letters, all 26 of them, and when we shall be able to read as well as to write, and then we shall always say exactly what we mean without any mistakes. Let the Neolithic ladies wash the mud out of the stranger's hair.
I shall be glad of that, said Taffy, because, after all, though you've brought every single other spear in the tribe of Tagumai, you've forgotten my daddy's black-handled spear. Then the head chief cried and sang and said and sang,
Taffy, dear, the next time you write a picture letter, you'd better send a man who can talk our language with it, to explain what it means. I don't mind it myself because I am a head chief, but it's very bad for the rest of the tribe of Tugumai, and as you can see, it surprises the stranger.
Then they adopted the stranger man, a genuine Tawara of Tawar, into the tribe of Tagumai, because he was a gentleman and did not make a fuss about the mud that the Neolithic ladies had put into his hair. But from that day to this, and I suppose it is all Taffy's fault, very few little girls have ever liked learning to read or write. Most of them prefer to draw pictures and play about with their daddies, just like Taffy. The crab that played with the sea. Before the high and far off times, O my best beloved, came the time of the very beginnings, and that was in the days when the eldest magician was getting things ready. First, he got the earth ready, then he got the sea ready, and then he told all the animals that they could come out and play, and the animals said, "Oh, eldest magician, what shall we play at?" And he said, "I will show you." He took the elephant, all the elephant there was, and said, "Play at being an elephant." And all the elephant there was played. He took the beaver, all the beaver there was, and said, "Play at being a beaver." And all the beaver there was played. He took the cow, all the cow there was, and said, "Play at being a cow." And all the cow there was played. He took the turtle, all the turtle there was, and said, "Play at being a turtle." And all the turtle there was played. One by one he took all the beasts and birds and fishes and told them what to play at. Towards evening, when people and things grow restless and tired, there came up the man with his own little girl daughter. Yes, with his own best beloved little girl daughter sitting upon his shoulder. And he said,
"What is this play, eldest magician?"
and the eldest magician said,
"Oh, son of Adam, this is the play of the very beginning, but you are too wise for this play."
and the man saluted and said,
"Yes, I am too wise for this play, but see that you make all the animals obedient to me.
Now, while the two were talking together, Ama, the crab, who was next in the game, scuttled off sideways and stepped into the sea, saying to himself, I will play my play alone in the deep waters. I will never be obedient to this son of Adam. Nobody saw him go away except the little girl daughter, where she leaned on the man's shoulder. The play went on till there were no more animals left without orders, and the eldest magician wiped the fine dust off his hands and walked about the world to see how the animals were playing. He went north, best beloved, and he found all the elephant there was digging with his tusks and stamping with his feet in the nice new clean earth that had been made ready for him.
Cool,
Said all the elephant there was, meaning,
is this right? Ayakun,
said the eldest magician, meaning,
that is quite right.
and he breathed upon the great rocks and lumps of earth that all the elephant there was had thrown up, and they became the great Himalayan mountains, and you can look them out on the map. He went east, and he found all the cow there was feeding in the field that had been made ready for her, and she licked her tongue round a whole forest at a time, and swallowed it, and sat down to chew her cud.
Cool,
Said all the cow there was.
Ayakun,
Said the eldest magician, and he breathed upon the bare patch where she had eaten, and upon the place where she had sat down, and one became the great Indian desert, and the other became the desert of Sahara, and you can look them out on the map. He went west, and he found all the beaver there was making a beaver dam across the mouths of broad rivers that had been got ready for him. Said all the beaver there was.
Ayakun,
Said the eldest magician, and he breathed upon the fallen trees and the still water, and they became the Everglades in Florida, and you may look them out on the map. Then he went south and found all the turtle there was, scratching with his flippers in the sand that had been got ready for him, and the sand and the rocks whirled through the air and fell far off into the sea.
Kun,
Said all the turtle there was.
Payakun,
Said the eldest magician, and he breathed upon the sand and the rocks where they had fallen in the sea, and they became the most beautiful islands of Borneo, Celebes, Sumatra, Java, and the rest of the Malay archipelago, and you can look them out on the map. By and by, the eldest magician met the man on the banks of the Perak River, and said,
Oh, son of Adam, are all the animals obedient to you?
Yes, said the man.
Is all the earth obedient to you?
Yes, said the man.
Is all the sea obedient to you?
No, said the man.
Once a day and once a night, the sea runs up the Perak River and drives the sweet water back into the forest so that my house is made wet. Once a day and once a night, it runs down the river and draws all the water after it so that there is nothing left but mud, and my canoe is upset. Is that the play you told it to play?
No, said the eldest magician.
That is a new and bad play.
Look, said the man. As he spoke, the great sea came up the mouth of the Perak River, driving the river backwards till it overflowed all the dark forest for miles and miles, and flooded the man's house.
This is wrong. Launch your canoe and we will find out who is playing with the sea,
Said the eldest magician. They stepped into the canoe. The little girl daughter came with them, and the man took his kris, a curving, wavy dagger with a blade like a flame, and they pushed out on the Perak River. Then the sea began to run back and back, and the canoe was sucked out of the mouth of the Perak River, past Selangor, past Malacca, past Singapore, out and out to the island of Bintang, as though it had been pulled by a string. Then the the eldest magician stood up and shouted, "Ho, beasts, birds, and fishes that I took between my hands at the very beginning, and taught the play that you should play, which one of you is playing with the sea?" Then all the beasts, birds, and fishes said together, "Eldest magician, we play the plays that you taught us to play, we and our children's children, but not one of us plays with the sea." Then the moon rose big and full over the water, and the eldest magician said to the hunchback old man who sits in the moon, spinning a fishing line, with which he hopes one day to catch the world.
"Oh, fisher of the moon, are you playing with the sea?"
"No," said the fisherman.
"I'm spinning a line with which I shall some day catch the world, but I do not play with the sea."
And he went on spinning his line. Now, there is also a rat up in the moon who always bites the old fisherman's line as fast as it is made. And the eldest magician said to him,
"Ho, rat of the moon, are you playing with the sea?"
and the rat said, "I am too busy biting through the line that this old fisherman is spinning. I do not play with the sea." And he went on biting the line. Then the little girl daughter put up her little soft brown arms with the beautiful white shell bracelets and said, "Oh, eldest magician, when my father here talked to you at the very beginning, and I leaned upon his shoulder while the beasts were being taught their plays, one beast went away naughtily into the sea before you had taught him his play." And the eldest magician said,
"How wise are little children who see and are silent. What was the beast like?"
And the little girl daughter said, "He was round and he was flat, and his eyes grew upon stalks, and he walked sideways like this, and he was covered with strong armor upon his back." And the eldest magician said,
"How wise are little children who speak truth. Now I know where Pa-ama went. Give me the paddle."
So he took the paddle, but there was no need to paddle, for the water flowed steadily past all the islands till they came to the place called Pusat Tasek, the heart of the sea, where the great hollow is that leads down to the heart of the world. And in that hollow grows the wonderful tree Paujangi that bears the magic twin nuts. Then the eldest magician slid his arm up to the shoulder through the deep, warm water, and under the roots of the wonderful tree, he touched the broad back of Pauama, the crab, and Pauama settled down at the touch, and all the sea rose up as water rises in a basin when you put your hand into it.
"Ah,"
Said the eldest magician,
"now I know who has been playing with the sea."
and he called out,
"What are you doing, Pa-ama?"
and Pauama, deep down below, answered, "Once a day and once a night I go out to look for my food. Once a day and once a night I return. Leave me alone." Then the eldest magician said,
"Listen, Pa-ama. When you go out from your cave, the waters of the sea pour down into Pusat Tasek, and all the beaches of all the islands are left bare, and the little fish die, and Raja Moyang Kaban, the king of the elephants, his legs are made muddy. When you come back and sit in Pusat Tasek, the waters of the sea rise, and half the little islands are drowned, and the man's house is flooded, and Raja Abdullah, the king of the crocodiles, his mouth is filled with the salt water."
Then Pauama, deep down below, laughed and said, "I did not know I was so important. Henceforward, I will go out 7 times a day, and the water shall never be still." And the eldest magician said,
"I cannot make you play the play you were meant to play, Pahu-ama, because you escaped me at the very beginning. But if you are not afraid, come up and we will talk about it."
"I am not afraid," said Pauama, and he rose to the top of the sea in the moonlight. There was nobody in the world so big as Pauama, for he was the king crab of all crabs, not a common crab, but a king crab. One side of his great shell touched the beach at Sarak, the other touched the beach at Bahang, and he was taller than the smoke of 3 volcanoes. As he rose up through the branches of the wonderful tree, he tore off one of the great twin fruits, the magic double-kerneled nuts that make people young. And the little girl daughter saw it bobbing alongside the canoe, and pulled it in and began to pick out the soft eyes of it with her little golden scissors. Now, said the magician, make a magic, Pauama, to show that you are really important. Pauama rolled his eyes and waved his legs, but he could only stir up the sea, because, though he was a king crab, he was nothing more than a crab. And the eldest magician laughed. You are not so important after all, Pauama, he said. Now let me try. And he made a magic with his left hand, with just the little finger of his left hand. And lo and behold, best beloved, Pauama's hard blue-green-black shell fell off him as a husk falls off a cocoanut, and Pauama was left all soft, soft as the little crabs that you sometimes find on the beach, best beloved. Indeed, you are very important, said the eldest magician. Shall I ask the man here to catch you with Chris? Shall I send for Raja Moyang Kaban, the king of the elephants, to pierce you with his tusks? Or shall I call Raja Abdullah, the king of the crocodiles, to bite you? And Pauama said, I am ashamed. Give me back my hard shell, and let me go back to Pusat Tasek, and I will only stir out once a day and once a night to get my food. And the eldest magician said, No, Pauama, I will not give you back your shell, for you will grow bigger and prouder and stronger, and perhaps you will forget your promise, and you will play with the sea once more. Then Pauama said, What shall I do? I am so big that I can only hide in Pusat Tasek, and if I go anywhere else, all soft as I am now, the sharks and the dogfish will eat me. And if I go to Pusat Tasek all soft as I am now, though I may be safe, I can never stir out to get my food, and so I shall die. Then he waved his legs and lamented. Listen, Pauama, said the eldest magician. I cannot make you play the play you were meant to play, because you escaped me at the very beginning. But if you choose, I can make every stone and every hole and every bunch of weed in all the seas a safe Pusat Tasek for you and your children for always. Then Pauama said, That is good, but I do not choose yet. Look, there is that man who talked to you at the very beginning. If it had not taken up your attention, I should not have grown tired of waiting and run away, and all this would never have happened. What will he do for me? And the man said, If you choose, I will make a magic so that both the deep water and the dry ground will be a home for you and your children, so that you shall be able to hide both on the land and in the sea. And Pauama said, I do not choose yet. Look, there is that girl who saw me running away at the very beginning. If she had spoken then, the eldest magician would have called me back, and all this would never have happened. What will she do for me? And the little girl daughter said, This is a good nut that I am eating. If you choose, I will make a magic, and I will give you this pair of scissors, very sharp and strong, so that you and your children can eat coconuts like this all day long when you come up from the sea to the land. Or you can dig a Pusat Tasek for yourself with the scissors that belong to you when there is no stone or hole nearby, and when the earth is too hard, by the help of these same scissors, you can run up a tree. And Pauama said, I do not choose yet, for all soft as I am, these gifts would not help me. Give me back my shell, O eldest magician, and then I will play your play." And the eldest magician said, "I will give it back, Pauama, for 11 months of the year. But on the 12th month of every year it shall grow soft again, to remind you and all your children that I can make magics, and to keep you humble, Pauama. For I see that if you can run both under the water and on the land, you will grow too bold. And if you can climb trees and crack nuts and dig holes with your scissors, you will grow too greedy, Pauama." Then Pauama thought a little and said, "I have made my choice. I will take all gifts." Then the eldest magician made a magic with the right hand, with all 5 fingers of his right hand, and lo and behold, best beloved, Pauama grew smaller and smaller and smaller, till at last there was only a little green crab swimming in the water alongside the canoe, crying in a very small voice, "Give me the scissors!" And the girl daughter picked him up on the palm of her little brown hand, and sat him in the bottom of the canoe, and gave him her scissors, and he waved them in his little arms, and opened them, and shut them, and snapped them, and said, "I can eat nuts, I can crack shells, I can dig holes, I can climb trees, I can breathe in the dry air, and I can find a safe pusat under every stone. I did not know I was so important. Kun, is this right?"
Paya Kun,
said the eldest magician, and he laughed and gave him his blessing. And little Po'ama scuttled over the side of the canoe into the water, and he was so tiny that he could have hidden under the shadow of a dry leaf on land, or of a dead shell at the bottom of the sea.
was that well done?
Said the eldest magician.
Yes,
Said the man.
but now we must go back to Perak, and that is a weary way to paddle. If we had waited till Pauama had gone out to Pusat Tasik and come home, the water would have carried us there by itself.
"You are lazy," said the eldest magician, "so your children shall be lazy. They shall be the laziest people in the world. They shall be called the Malazi, the lazy people." And he held up his finger to the moon and said, "O fisherman, here is the man too lazy to row home. Pull his canoe home with your line, fisherman."
No,
Said the man.
if I am to be lazy all my days, let the sea work for me twice a day, forever. That will save paddling.
And the eldest magician laughed and said,
Payokun, that is right.
and the rat of the moon stopped biting the line, and the fisherman let his line down till it touched the sea, and he pulled the whole deep sea along, past the island of Bintang, past Singapore, past Malacca, past Selangor, till the canoe whirled into the mouth of the Perak River again.
Kun,
Said the fisherman of the moon.
Payakun.
Said the eldest magician.
See now that you pull the sea twice a day and twice a night forever, so that the Malaysy fisherman may be saved paddling. But be careful not to do it too hard, or I shall make a magic on you as I did to Pauama.
Then they all went up the Perak River and went to bed, best beloved. Now listen and attend. From that day to this, the moon has always pulled the sea up and down and made what we call the tides. Sometimes the fisher of the sea pulls a little too hard, and then we get spring tides. And sometimes he pulls a little too softly, and then we get what are called neap tides. But nearly always he is careful because of the eldest magician. And Pauama, you can see when you go to the beach how all Pauama's babies make little pusat tassocks for themselves under every stone and bunch of weeds on the sand. You can see them waving their little scissors, and in some parts of the world they truly live on the dry land and run up the palm trees and eat coconuts, exactly as the girl daughter promised. But once a year, all Pauamas must shake off their hard armor and be soft to remind them of what the eldest magician could do. And so it isn't fair to kill or hunt Pauama's babies just because old Pauama was stupidly rude a very long time ago. Oh yes, and Pauama's babies hate being taken out of their little pusat tassocks and brought home in pickle bottles. That is why they nip you with their scissors, and it serves you right. China going, P and O's pass Poama's playground clothes, and his Pusat Tasek lies near the track of most BIs. UYK and NBL know Poama's home as well, as the fisher of the sea knows Bens, MMs, and Rubatinos. But, and this is rather queer, ATLs cannot come here. O and DOA must go round another way. Orient, Anchor, Bibby, Hall never go that way at all. UCS would have a fit if it found itself on it, and if beavers took their cargoes to Penang instead of Lagos, or a fat Shawshavel bore passengers to Singapore, or a White Star were to try a little trip to Surabaya, or a BSA went on past Natal to Sheraban, then great Mr. Lloyd's would come with a wire and drag them home. You'll know what my riddle means when you've eaten mangosteens. And that is a picture of Pauama the crab rising out of the sea as tall as the smoke of three volcanoes. I haven't drawn the three volcanoes because Pauama was so big. Pauama is trying to make a magic, but he is only a silly old king crab, and so he can't do anything. You can see he is all legs and claws and empty hollow shell. The canoe is the canoe that the man and the girl daughter and the eldest magician sailed from the Perak River in. The sea is all black and bobbly because Pauama has just risen up out of Pusat Pasek. Pusat Pasek is underneath, so I haven't drawn it. The man is waving his curvy crisp knife at Pauama. The little girl daughter is sitting quietly in the middle of the canoe. She knows she is quite safe with her daddy. The eldest magician is standing up at the other end of the canoe, beginning to make magic. He has left his magic thrown on the beach, and he has taken off his clothes so as not to get wet, and he has left the magic cloud behind too, so as not to tip the boat over. The thing that looks like another little canoe outside the real canoe is called an outrigger. It is a piece of wood tied to sticks, and it prevents the canoe from being tipped over. The canoe is made out of one piece of wood, and there is a paddle at one end of it.